But I'm the only one up. This dude just changed it on me. So I went back, man. I cracked my razor, man. And I came back from behind this dude, man, and I got him from ear to ear.
What's up, everybody? I'm Blessed and Free. Welcome back to another episode of DOC TV. So I got another interview for you guys today. This guy has a YouTube channel, Convict's Perspective. He's done a lot of time in the California prison system, and he's on DOC TV today to share his story, man. So for the people that don't know who you are, bro, why don't you go ahead and just introduce yourself? Just tell them your name and, where you're from.
My name is Flaco. I'm from a small town called Milpitas, California, which right now borders San Jose. I'm from a neighborhood called Barrio Milpas Locos originally. And as a youth, I was a Norteño gang member, was affiliated with subsets of the Nuestra Familia, Nuestra Raza, and then was also affiliated with the Nuestra Familia for years.
All right, man. So, what was your life like growing up? Did you have your parents? Were you in the streets? Like, how did all that go down for you?
Well, as a kid, man, I grew up in a very diversified area, man. I say Milpitas, California is a melting pot. And what I mean by that is it has every type of racial background there. You have a lot of Hispanics, you have a lot of African Americans, you have a lot of Asians, you have a lot of Pacific Islanders, as well as whites. So it was just a place where, it's a small town. I mean, now it's a lot bigger. But back then it was just like any other kid, man, just trying to fit in, trying to do the best I can as a kid, man. It wasn't always easy as a kid, man, but, life changed, I say around 1988, 89, when Colors came out, the California scene just blew up out there as far as the gang banging culture, man. That movie had a adverse effect on the communities. Whereas before you heard about gangs out there in the streets, now next thing you know, everybody wanted to be gang members out there, man. And I followed in the same line, man. Like a lot of the homeboys where I grew up in the Hispanic community. So I started to align with, the Hispanic culture, you know what I mean? And grew up and was raised out there as a Norteño. You know what I mean? Started gang banging at a young age, was already catching cases when I was like 9 years old, was already on probation, was already using drugs, alcohol. And, it was, well, how's the best way to say it, man? As a kid, you gravitate towards that lifestyle. You start to see what people look up to in the neighborhood. You know what I mean? So we've seen all these old timers coming out, all chatted down, big old bro shots talking about Norte this, NF this, and about the Sureños, our enemies. And so we gravitate towards that. And the color we wore back then was red. You know what I mean? So that was, and it wasn't about red or blue. That was just how we identified ourselves. We were more about our barrios back then, our neighborhoods. And so just like any other, I don't care where you're from, you could be from the East Coast, Midwest, down South. Anybody that's been out there in the streets know how that gang culture is. And it was no different anywhere else where I was from.
Yeah, and it's even more like in California than it is in a lot of other places as far as like the gang culture. So when you're living, as a teenager, is that when you started getting involved with the gang life, like teenager?
Oh, yeah, I got involved in the gang life. I started trying to be a gangster by the time I was like 11 years old, man.
Yeah.
A little wannabe as a kid, man, and just eventually rose through the ranks. And, I mean? By the time around 1990, I was probably about 13 years old when I got jumped in my hood. And it was like any other time when you get jumped in your hood out there, man, you get beat down, you have to throw chingazos, throw fights, man, just get jumped in, man. And then from there, my career just started to slowly skyrocket. You know what I mean? We went from at that time, the 80s and 90s, we hadn't been hit with that hardcore gang banging scene until about the early 90s. Then everywhere you seen gangs, everywhere out throughout San Jose, man. And it was funk season. Back then, we used to set trip with all the other hoods out there, man. So we went from like just basic fights, sometimes somebody gets stabbed to next thing you know, we're doing shootings out there in the streets. And I caught my committing offense when I was 18 years old for a drive-by shooting on some other Norteños on what you would call a red-on-red crime, because back then we used to set trip. Things changed years later, man, but that's where my life was at that time.
Yeah, when you say set trip and you're talking about shooting your color, that's because they're violating, right? And you guys are kind of just like straightening them out. Well,
back then there was, what I was affiliated with, we're very strict and disciplined, and we follow orders. And so at that time in the early 90s, there was no directives, there was no instructions for us out there in the streets not to fight each other. Around 1997, they started sending mandates out to the streets the NF. The NF is kind of like how you would consider like the Mexican mafia is for the Sureños. The NF is that for the Norteños. So they started sending out mandates that we were no longer to engage in red on red crime, and we were to take all our actions towards the Sureños that were trying to move into our neighborhoods. And so that's when things started to change to where before that, we really didn't have Sureños to fight there on the streets, so we would fight each other. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But as a lot of families started to migrate from down south up north to set up shop, they started setting up their own neighborhoods. So next thing you know, we got people who are banging Southern California up north. So that's what it came down to. You know
So
what I mean?
it kind of all just like mixing together, it sounded like.
Yeah, yeah.
So what made that happen in 97? Was that strictly because the Sureños were trying to make a move on your territory?
Yeah, and you had a lot of areas out there like San Jose, Stockton, Sacramento, Modesto, all these areas, you know, a lot of homeboys were coming in for murders, you know, on other Norteños. And the Sureños were starting to get deeper and deeper up north. And so they decided to change the whole direction of everything out there in the streets. Whereas before the Norteños were just, that was what you represented. That's where you were from. You weren't part of these other factions like the Nuestra Raza, which is called the Northern Structure, or the Nuestra Familia. Those are like sub-factions within the political spectrum of prison. Now, as they had members starting to get out there to the streets, they wanted to have influence with gang members. So it was basically a control mechanism. You have a big organization, the NF, a powerful organization that only has maybe anywhere from 150 to 300 members, but it has a bunch of foot soldiers that are under their umbrella.
And not
Right.
to mention they're in prison and now they got people on the outside. And in order to make money in prison, you need people on the outside to do shit.
Yes, that's how what you call regiments out there that they started to establish. They used to do that for years, but before, what the NF used to do is they used to take care of their own business out there in the streets. But now they changed all the mandates. They started to, you know, they pushed a CD called GUN out there, which was called Generations of United Norteños, which called for the end of red on red crime and to focus all attention on the Sureños. You had people who now were being taxed out there to contribute money out there. You know what I'm saying? A regular Norteño street gang member before would just do his time, whatever he was doing on the streets, and then would go to prison. It would be up to him if he wanted to get politically clicked up or not. Now it changed. Now all of them are strictly under their cracked whips. In other words, this is the authority. Whatever comes from the authority here, you're going to have to implement it out there on the streets.
And whatever comes from the higher ups, like they have to follow that 100%. Otherwise, you're done, right? Like you're X'd out.
So, you know, I was out there functioning. I ended up getting validated what you call an indeterminate shoe. I got validated as a prison gang member, a Northern Structure member is what they classified me as. And
You went to prison though when you said you did a drive-by shooting and got knocked off for that.
yeah,
What'd you get for that?
5 years. I got lucky because this is before all the gang enhancements came out. This was 96. So what they got me for was a 246 shooting into an inhabited dwelling, which carries 3, 5, and 7. And then you have a 12031 or 12034, which is discharging a firearm from a vehicle, which carries 16, 2, and 3. So before they made all these new gang enhancements, I got sentenced under that old law because this crime happened in 96. So I took the midterm 5 years.
Yeah, you got blessed.
Yeah. Nowadays they're wrapping you up for like 20 years on cases just like that. You know what I mean?
And you were 18 when you went to prison for the first time?
I was 18 when I caught the case. I was probably about 19 when I hit prison.
So, I mean, what was that like for you? I know you grew up in the streets and you were obviously doing shit like that already. So like, but you know, you're still young and you're still a young man figuring out, you know, who you are in life. So how was it for you entering into the California prison system?
Well, before the county jail it was off the hook, man. You're dealing with grown men convicts. It was a whole different type of style back then. You had more OGs there. You don't have as many OGs. A lot of them fall off nowadays. So back then we didn't have the strict regulations and policies that we had to follow. So it was like a free for fall. You know what I mean? Like we didn't have any type of mandates in there. So we were getting off and getting off in fights in there. You know, I ended up catching an attempted murder when I was there, man. There was, while I was facing this drive-by shooting, man. So there was this,
in jail.
So I was watching X-Men, and I think it was a Saturday or Sunday, and I was still blind to prison. You know what I mean? Like, and there was this one dude, he used to try to bully everybody in the pod, man. This dude was facing 3 strikes, older white dude. And he would always get pulled out. And there were some questions. Everybody thought that he was working with the correctional staff because they would pull him out late hours to do work and all kinds of stuff, man. And so he was a big, heavy set dude, man, probably about like 5'10", like 400 pounds. You know what I'm saying?
Bro.
And so I'm a skinny kid. They call me Flacco. I was skinny back then, man. I'm 6'5" now, 270, but imagine then I was 6'5", like 150, 140.
Yeah.
You know what I'm saying? I was one of those little skinny gangsters out there that's going to, you know, creep behind you to try to pull that trigger or try to whack you.
Yeah.
So this dude goes up while I'm watching X-Men and he changes it to NASCAR racing. Really, sports is supposed to take precedent over anything. I didn't know that until years later. But I'm the only one up. This dude just changed it on me. So I went back, man. I cracked my razor, man. And I came back from behind this dude, man, and I got him from ear to ear, across the neck. And then I hit him again in the arm, and then I kicked him and I called him a bitch, right? And then he went to the gate, man. There's blood everywhere, man. I flush my thing, and I go lay in my bed and go to sleep. And the homeboys in there, they've been to prison. They jump up, get your shoes. What's going on? And they were mad at me because I didn't tell them I was going to do it because there was no sense of direction yet, man. So the dude leaves. About 10 minutes later, they start pulling everybody out. They pull me out, and they put me in this holding cell. And so they tell me, next thing you know, they start trying to, I don't know. They come and tell me that they're charging me with attempted murder. I start flipping out and I start fucking I'm like a young kid. I start hitting my head on the plexiglass and the holding cell and stuff. You know what I mean? Like, they come in, they beat the shit out of me, took me on a elevator ride, and then they put the shackles on, right? And they ran them all the way up under me, man. And I'm just talking shit, man. Like, you know what I mean?
What made you take it to that level over the TV? Were you trying to like say, hey, man, I'm tall?
He was already doing things to try to punk people in there, kind of like, so I felt, man.
Like an ongoing thing.
I'm young, and I'm like, man, like, and he's trying to take advantage of that. You know what I mean? And I'm up there in a different time period than the other homeboys, and so like they had just got there, and I've been seeing this for a while, man. I'm like, I don't trust this dude. This dude's funny style, man. And I think he didn't like me anyways because I was a Norteño.
There's always one of those type people in every dorm I've ever been in.
This story's going to get really interesting, though, because I'm going to talk about how I ran into him in prison about, 2 years later.
All right.
Okay. So I get shackled up. I get took into a place called 6B at that time. And when I ended up getting there, this was a whole different program. This is where all the NF members and Northern Structure members were. So this is where I started getting my schooling. Now they start pulling me out, trying to interrogate me and get me to admit that I hit this dude. You know what I'm saying? And I'm young. I'm not saying nothing. I don't know what you're talking about. I'm already looking at time for this drive-by shooting. I'm like, man, I came in here. I got this. I just pled guilty. I'm waiting to get sentenced on this. And now I'm looking at attempted murder. I'm like, damn, I may never be getting out. So I'm not saying anything.
You're tripping.
And so they told me, finally, they got frustrated with me. They tried to send the old paper boy that was a free staff that did the laundry to my cell to talk to me because he seen me when they were bringing me through. And so he went and talked to them. So he's like, hey, what happened? Come on, man. You know, and he's trying to get me. I'm like, man, I don't know what these guys are talking about. So they finally tell me, they go, look, we know you did this. He told us you did this. He doesn't want to be on paperwork that he told on you, but we know you did this. You know what I mean? So they put me in high security max at that time. And that's where I started to be around all the big boys that were involved in the mix and started getting the proper education and started learning what to be a Norteño was, what to be a Nuestra Raza member was, and all that stuff. So from there, I went to prison. And to answer your question, when I first went to prison, Matt, like, man, I said this before in an interview on a video I did recently. I wasn't nervous the first time I went to prison, and I'm being honest. Now, there was times in prisons where I was nervous later on, where I did have that fear, where I did have, everybody knows that fear before you stab someone or anything like that. You get the clammy hands, your ass starts to sweat, you start to get gas and all that. You know what I mean? That's just the reality. Fear will make you react. But at that time, it was just like anything else. I was well schooled because where I was at, I was around a bunch of killers and they were lacing me up the properly way. So going to San Quentin, they're like, man, this is our backyard. I wasn't nervous about anything.
So you were 100% dedicated to that life that you were living at that point.
I was 100% dedicated, man. And, rose through the ranks throughout the years, man, was involved in it, man. And, prison was prison. You know what I mean? Like, it's just a cost of doing business. Whether stabbing someone, getting into a riot, getting into a melee, eventually was running prison yards. I used to school a lot of youngsters that were out there. Then on the streets, I was functioning with the regiments out there, which are the criminal organized crime out there in the streets. You know what I'm saying? Which is
you had your hands in everything.
Yeah, mob activities, basically.
So when you're in California's prison and you're living the life that you're living as a gang member, like what's a day in prison look like for you, considering, you know, you got a bunch of responsibilities now, obviously, you know, being in a gang. So what does that look like?